Hey everybody, it's Don. Today I'm at Cedar Bog, a national natural landmark in Champaign County, Ohio, one of the most botanically diverse sites in all of Ohio. So let's go see what it looks like in winter. You start your visit at Cedar Bog at the Visitor Center. And this is an energy efficient building that has some passive heating installed, solar panels on the roof, waterless toilets, and all kinds of hallmarks of energy efficiency. And as well as some educational displays and meeting areas and things like that, as well as the main gift shop and registration desk. Once you pass through that, you start to see the Cedar Bog itself in front of you. Now what we're going to do today is pass through several habitats and just talk kind of generally today about Cedar Bog and the different kinds of things you can see here. Obviously coming here in spring, summer, and fall will give you many more flowering plants, but we will see trees, we're going to see tracks, we're going to see water, boardwalks, so forth. So let's take a walk and let me introduce you to Cedar Bog. As you proceed down the boardwalk to get into Cedar Bog proper, one of the first things you notice is that's different about this spot than most areas around are the presence of white cedars that you can see behind me. Now there are several populations of white cedars in this particular vicinity of Ohio, in Champaign and nearby Greene County, but they're still a rare tree to find in this part of Ohio. And they're essentially considered a glacial relic. They require cool temperatures to make a living, to hang on. And in other sites I visited, like Clifton Gorge and Massey's Creek Gorge near Cedarville, there are some white cedars, and they hang on in those habitats because these limestone river gorges maintain a cool, refrigerated habitat for them to persist in. Here at Cedar Bog, the coolness is maintained by the spring water that this area is fed by. So this ground is maintained in a moist condition. We'll take a look at it by the presence of underground springs. And those springs do two things. They keep this area warmer than normal, than the ambient area in the winter, but they keep it cooler than the ambient in summer. And that's the key part of white cedar's persistence. And so here's a big white cedar right behind me. This is one that you can see right as you first hit the cedar swamp forest on the boardwalk that's rooted in this moist soil of Cedar Bog. And again, white cedar is known for these soft, flat needles. This is Thuja occidentalis. And these trees can be very old. Okay, white cedars can be, these are quite large trees. Some of them are approaching 2 feet in diameter probably. So here's one in front of me that's about 1.5 feet in diameter. They could be several hundred years old. So the white cedars that you find here in Cedar Bog, they extend a little bit beyond the boundary of the nature preserve. It's about a 450-acre nature preserve. But they used to be much more extensive in this area, but because of farming and development and all that sort of stuff, a lot of them were cut and removed, and the wetlands drained for that matter. So there's some very large ones over there in the distance. But these white cedars line your walk when you first head down into Cedar Bog, which leads me to my next point about Cedar Bog, and that's the name. Okay, Cedar Bog is misnamed. Cedar Bog is actually a fen. It's a product of the glacial history of this area. There are large, flat river valleys, buried river valleys here, with some end and ridge moraines surrounding those valleys. And Cedar Bog is nestled in a spot kind of at the foot of one of those moraines, where the valley flattens out, and it's just simply fed by spring water that comes out of that moraine, that glacial till material. It's calcareous, has a relatively high pH, and it is about 55, 57 degrees when it comes out of the ground all year round. And so it is a groundwater fed wetland, calcareous, meets the definitions of a fen rather than a bog, which is usually surface water of lower pH and often tannin rich and nutrient poor. And so Cedar Bog is indeed a fen and not a bog. Everybody tells that story, but nonetheless, the name has never changed. Okay, so here's a peek out towards some of the openings. Before I get there, let me show you something here that you can see at Cedar Bog, which is pretty rare. And that is poison sumac. So here's some signage about this poison tree. And right in front of me, at the base of that tree, this one going up right there is a poison sumac tree. Now, poison sumac is related to poison ivy, which is much more abundant and common. And people think often that they're seeing poison sumac, but poison sumac's really a wetland tree. You can only find it on the borders of wetlands and bogs and things like that. Fairly rare. Most people will never encounter poison sumac, but you can find it here pretty commonly in Cedar Bog. And which, again, if you do, have to be aware of it, because it will give you reactions like poison ivy will. All right, so it also makes a very beautiful leaf that turns a beautiful colors in fall. So I'll come back in my fall visit and show you what that looks like at that time. Okay, now we're approaching some of the areas where you can look out into the some of the openings. And this is a peek at Sedge Meadow. Okay, so there are large areas of Cedar Bog occupied by Sedge Meadow. Sedge Meadow, their openings, they're dominated by sedges, common wetland plants of several species. I'm not going to bother to try to identify those during this visit. My intention with this area is to come back once a season. This is my winter visit, and I'll come back in spring, summer, and fall and show you some of the highlights, but this area is so diverse. You could visit once every 2 or 3 weeks and see something new in bloom, essentially. Up in the visitor center, they keep a running tally of what's blooming in the bog at any given time to give you some guidance on that. So here you can see a little opening, that's lined by the cedars. In fact, the cedars are invading, if you will, the sedge meadow itself. And so periodically they actually have to manage these meadows to keep the white cedars from taking over and dominating and essentially contributing to the drying of the wetland through their transpiration action. Okay, so here's a little peek, and again, in the summer, spring and summer, this is awash with flowers. And of course, grasses, sedges, and so forth as well. So there's our first peek at a sedge meadow, which is an uncommon habitat now in Ohio. Okay, I'm gonna make one last little stop with this leg at the east branch of Cedar Run, which you can see as we cross it here, which is not frozen. Like I said, it's been very cold. We've had below zero weather for the first time in several years, I think. And this has not frozen over, and that's because that is spring water that's coming out of the ground, in 55, 57 degrees. It's cooler than that here, I'm sure, once it gets above ground, but it won't freeze. This will only freeze during the most extreme cold that persists for a long time. And again, that keeps this area a little bit warmer than normal during the winter, but it keeps it cooler than normal in summer. That's very noticeable in summer. If you come here in a 95-degree day up by the visitor center and you walk down into this area, it could be 10 or 15 degrees cooler in this spot relative to where the visitor center is situated. So it's really noticeable. It makes a visit here in midsummer really pleasant. So now, a couple of special things that you can see if you were to look closely enough and get lucky are, one, the animals that occupy this area. There would be muskrats, there are mink, I've seen mink. raccoons, all those sorts of animals. I see rabbit tracks everywhere. But one special thing in these little tributaries of Cedar Run that has been detected here are brook lampreys. Brook lampreys are small little, well, they're lampreys. They're about 6 inches long at maturity. And they're not the kind of lampreys that are parasitic on fish that you might be aware of. These are small lampreys that after they are born in small streams like this, they migrate downstream to a larger part of the water body and just simply bury themselves in the sediment and filter feed for several years until they mature, and they head back upstream, form a little nest, mate, and lay eggs, and then, you know, the cycle continues. So these little tributaries are utilized by brook lampreys, which are a kind of a special thing here in Ohio and an indicator of very high water quality as well. And so that's the East Branch. We're going to see as we walk the larger branch of Cedar Run as well eventually. Okay, so right at this border, we temporarily leave the cedar swamp forest for the hardwood swamp forest. As you can see, the landscape has changed. Here we're seeing now tulip trees. Previously, this area was filled with ash trees, particularly black ash, okay, which were essentially largely destroyed by emerald ash borer, although some have regrown. There's regeneration that's happened, along with other ash species, but tulips, cottonwoods, silver maples, things like that. Lots of these species that like moist soils. Okay, in front of us is a grove of tulip trees, and but you can see how the appearance has changed. All right, and you have various choices of trails to take, and what we will do, just to show you the signage. Okay, we are right here, and we're going to take this trail to the north and skirt along the sedge meadow and in the hardwood forest, then wrap around, visit the west branch of Cedar Run, then make our way back around to our starting point and then the visitor center here. Okay, so that's the layout, and it's about 1.5 miles maybe that we're going to do today. So let's proceed. As I walk, I'm seeing tracks of all sorts, rabbits and squirrels. I'll show it to you eventually. But in this spot, I'm seeing mink tracks. So let me point those out to you. Tracks in snow can be a challenge because they don't always leave a perfect imprint, depending on what the weather's been like, how deep the snow is, how old the tracks are. But this trail and its location and what it looks like is all indications of a mink trail. So first of all, this is the boardwalk, and you can see that things have been, going in and under this boardwalk, and there's a very heavily used trail that borders the edge of the boardwalk right here. Okay, in a very regular pattern. You can see it's the same trail being used over and over again. All right, so if we look right here, these are classic mink tracks. Okay, now again, like I said, they're not totally visible in terms of showing you exactly what the toes look like and everything, but mink tracks show 5 toes, and the rear, in fact, let me go back down there and take a look. The rear track, the hind foot, has that upside down U pad in the middle. So that's a very classic mink track. And you can see they've been basically utilizing this boardwalk, hiding and hanging out, maybe hunting underneath there. But I've seen mink very frequently here at Cedar Bog, along the streams, the Cedar Run branches, but also just around this boardwalk. So we're gonna head this direction. When you come here in the summer, you can find skinks, 5-line skinks. They like to hang out on this boardwalk. and they're pretty patient. You can get pretty close to them. And so when I come back here in the summer and fall, we'll likely see those things. All right, so I'm heading into the hardwood forest, and I'll just point out to you that a little bit about the devastation that the ash population has undergone here at Cedar Bog. A lot of the downed trees that you see all throughout Cedar Bog here were ash trees of several species, but particularly black ash and some green ashes. And now they got heavily killed. They did regenerate. There was a lot of regeneration. Then of course those trees get re-attacked as well. I see in front of me a lot of live black ashes still. Like here's one, for example, right in front of me. And black ash can be identified partly because of the darkness of the buds, black and brown buds, but the leaflets on its leaves are attached directly to the rachis of their compound leaves, unlike almost all other ash species. So here's black ash, was once very common in this site. And black ash can also have a very characteristic bark to help you identify it. Here's one that's pretty well damaged. If not, I guess it's still alive. Pretty heavily damaged by emerald ash borer. I'm gonna reach the camera out to show you this one nearby. Just how corky that bark is. Okay, that's a black ash showing very corky and spongy bark. Okay, no other ash species displays that kind of thing. If you were to squeeze that tree, it feels spongy. So I see a lot of young black ashes, but all the big ones are dead. And even these young ones, they grow for a while and they get re-attacked. So here's an example. Here's a tree ash that's still alive. These are live branches. But this spot right here, you see where the bark has been chipped, has been done by woodpeckers. Can't tell you exactly which species right now. And what that woodpecker is going for are emerald ash borer larvae that were live under the bark. So when you see that kind of thing on ashes these days in this area, you basically know those are infested trees that woodpeckers are foraging on for emerald ash borer larvae. Okay, so now maybe these things some will succeed. We can hope. And right now there's certainly profuse regeneration of young trees, but we'll see what the future holds with time on that. All right, so let me walk up the trail a little farther. I think you get the gist of this particular area. And once we hit near the sedge meadow area. Now we are leaving the hardwood forest for a second, passing back into the cedar swamp forest for a moment. And then once we get out here, the sedge meadow is revealed again. So a real striking contrast to where we were just walking. Now the reason that trees aren't out here is it is actually too wet in some cases for trees, but also that they are managed out here. Okay, this site could be taken over by trees if they didn't periodically manage it, including for the white cedars. Like I said, I can see young white cedars scattered all over there. Now, if you see in the distance and maybe these trees near me, one thing that helps maintain it, an opening like this is also deer. And so these white cedars in front of me, many of which are excellent bonsai models, which I love to talk about, all exhibit what's called a browse line. So deer will browse basically as high as they can easily reach and basically limb up a tree. And you can see that has been done in a lot of these white cedars bordering this sedge meadow. It's very obvious, okay, the effect that deer have had. Now, in this wetland, there are sedges, many flowering plant species in the Asteraceae. You can find carnivorous plants here, like roundleaf sundew, which is a very small diminutive plant. We'll have to come back in the summer to find it, but we will do that. And another special tree you can find around here is another relict boreal relict species that is only found at sites much farther north from here. And that's this species right here with these small cones. This is dwarf birch. Here's the leaf of a dwarf birch. All right, so that tree is a boreal relict. It only typically grows in areas much farther north from here in much colder habitats, but it can persist here after it was essentially forced here by the glaciers because of this cool habitat that this spring water helps maintain. Okay, so this is dwarf birch, one of the special boreal relicts you can find here at Cedar Bog. So after you proceed past this particular opening, we'll head back inland, so to speak, for a little bit, and then come back out into another sedge meadow. And so let's proceed. Now we're going to enter another peek at the sedge meadow. And the signage here says that the sedge meadows are where you really find many of the rare and endangered species that are housed here at Cedar Bog. And moreover, there are over 60 species of sedges in these sedge meadows, if you want to get an idea of the diversity of a particular plant group. Here's a spot I can see where a little bit of management has been done. Over in this little grove of white cedars, I see that several have been cut out. It's been thinned, just presumably to prevent some encroachment by woody species. This is an area too where you can find the sundews that I had mentioned, okay, along the boardwalk here, and we'll come back in the summer and take a look for those. All right, so in these meadows, by the way, you can see there is some standing water. There are small little tributaries that trickle their way toward the tributaries of Cedar Run, but it's often just, marshy ground, and it doesn't obviously look wet all the time, but you can see it where it's iced up now. And there's a lot of peat as well, real peaty soil with a high organic matter content all throughout here. There's some cattails there in that grove. All right, now we've kind of done our part where Cedar Bog visits and interweaves with the forest, the sedge meadows with the forest. Now we're going to head back into the hardwood forest and down toward the larger branch of Cedar Run and see what we can see in that direction. I do want to point out that something I'm really on the lookout for is I know that bobcats have been spotted here before, and I would love to find a bobcat track today. I'm still seeing many mink tracks, and of course deer, squirrels, and rabbits. So my fingers are crossed for a bobcat track. So let's see if we can find one. As I walk through this hardwood swamp forest, there are lots of shrubs. Okay, there are gray and red osier dogwoods. Those generally have red stems, one more grayish than the other. There are spice bushes throughout here. These are spice bushes in front of me right here. And then there's a really nice species that flowers in May called ninebark. And this shrub right here looks like nothing special at the moment. This is a ninebark, Physocarpus. And here's a leftover seed cluster, or what's left of it, of ninebark. They make a very beautiful flower and really interesting peeling bark. This is one of those shrubs that is in the horticultural trade, and you can find it here in Cedar Bog. Okay, right along this stretch. They do a good job of removing invasives in general here at Cedar Bog, although there's still some, like I see multiflora rose to my right here. And there's some honeysuckle, but not much, especially not compared to the areas around here that are not managed. All right, now there's also this tree species here that takes a lot of heat these days when it's grown in developments and old housing projects and stuff, and that is silver maple. And silver maple is essentially a wetland tree. And it's quite fine when it's growing where, you know, it's supposed to be, but when you plant it in neighborhoods, grows fast, looks nice for a while, but then people start to cut them apart, hat rack them, they start to fall down, and everybody gets angry at silver maples. So they're really not planted much anymore, but there's a lot of them in this part of Ohio. And this is the kind of habitat, however, that silver maples are where they're native. So there's a nice one right over there, multi-trunked silver maple, in this kind of spot where it's supposed to be. Okay, but again, they were planted by the thousands in developments after World War II, for example, through the 60s, even into the 70s. And they've fallen out of favor at this point, I'd say. Okay, so let's keep going. We're soon to hit the west branch of Cedar Run, and we will see what we can see along there. I expect lots more tracks, I'm seeing plenty, but maybe we'll get something special along Cedar Run. When you get to this part of the preserve, the trail is very straight, and to my right, I'm bordering the west branch of Cedar Run, which is also fairly straight, other than a few natural meanders that have started to develop. But what that should indicate to you is a stream that's been channelized in its past. All right, so this stream was straightened out. Its natural curves were taken out, and it was deepened, which was a strategy that was used when an area was intended to be drained for agriculture. And so this in the past has been drained. It's now completely preserved, of course, and left to kind of regenerate some natural habitat. One thing that's kind of fun to see is this west branch is periodically crossed by logs that have fallen across it. You can see how much these logs are used by animals to cross the creek. And so here's a real heavily used trail. You can see the dirty feet of the animals that cross it and get their feet wet a little bit. And that could include raccoons, foxes, mink, what have you, whatever might be traversing this stream, or crossing it at least. There's a number of sites along this that where these little natural bridges occur. And yeah, I'm seeing still lots of mink tracks. There have been beavers in this creek before. In fact, there was a beaver trying to build a dam on this creek for about a year or so that the management decided they didn't want, and have continued to remove the dam long enough for the beaver to give up and move on. Not sure if they did any trapping of the beavers or not to get rid of them, but that's a decision that land managers need to make, because beavers really do rearrange the habitat when they're there, right? They're ecosystem engineers. Preserve called Glen Helen in Yellow Springs decided to let beavers do their thing. There's now a very large dam in Glen Helen Nature Preserve, but this site decided to get rid of them because they really will alter the landscape. All right, let's move on. Well, down below me here is a little tracking highlight. There's turkey tracks. Okay, turkeys have made a big comeback in Ohio in the last 20 to 30 years. And I've now seen a couple sets of these as I've walked. And so I have never seen a turkey here at Cedar Bog, but it's nice to know they're here too. I saw them recently at John Bryan State Park. Trying to identify trees in the winter without their leaves can be challenging, but if you know something about bark and buds and perhaps leaves that might be retained, you can get some IDs. Here's one that's pretty obvious when you see it, and it's one that retains its leaves quite a bit. These are the dried up leaves from last season, displaying what we call marcescence. They don't fall till spring. But this bark is very distinctive, very muscly, rippled bark. This is hornbeam. It's American hornbeam. And we would call this in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, musselwood. It's also known as blue beech, but Hornbeam is, I'd say, probably the most common name for this particular species, which is a small tree species. It only gets to be maybe 3-4 times that diameter in general. I don't know what the largest hornbeam is, champion hornbeam, but that's one right here along the west branch of Cedar Run. Nearby is a very large cottonwood. So there's a big cottonwood right beside it. Again, a wetland tree species. This one's partially hollow, and it's been used by animals quite a bit. I can see a lot of animal activity going up into that hollow right there. Okay, so let's continue. I've been on the lookout for any signs of active plant life, and there is one species that stays green for much of the year, growing very slowly, but only because of the warmer waters of Cedar Run here. And in the water you can see watercress. This is a non-native species. This is the edible form of a European plant species that's invasive or introduced here in North America. But it basically grows in and around Cedar Run quite a bit here. And it's pretty green, so it's kind of probably growing at a very slow rate right now. And once it does warm up, it'll be one of the first plants to really perk up. The other thing I'm on the lookout for, in that sense, are skunk cabbages that should start to be poking their heads out of the ground around this time of the year. And if I see those, I'll tell you some stories about skunk cabbage. Along this section of the boardwalk, there's a really heavily used trail running right alongside the boardwalk, where the animals have repeatedly jumped or stepped into the same footprints over and over and over again. But something that jumped out of that and bounded away is something different, and those are shown here. Okay, those tracks, to me, appear to be weasel tracks. Okay, they're somewhat like the mink tracks, but they're a lot smaller. They tend to land beside each other. These are just a little off kilter, so it was perhaps running pretty good, bounding quickly. But those have all the hallmarks of weasel tracks, which would not be a surprise to see here. And that adds another interesting track to our list. Let's see what else we can see. Down below me, near the creek, I see a real collection of very, very clear tracks. I try to get as close to them as I can with my extender here without walking down there, which I'm technically not supposed to do. So let's see what we can see here. Okay, I'm leaning all the way out here. And down below me, there's a mixture of tracks. Obviously, you should see the turkey tracks. About a foot beyond the turkey tracks are raccoon tracks. Okay, with a big back foot that looks kind of like a bear print. And then near us are the mink tracks. So there's a neat little collection of turkey, raccoon, and mink tracks. And of course, there's some deer tracks over in the distance as well. So that's a neat little spot. Right here's the spot where the beaver was attempting to build a dam. And this pile of sticks you see over there was the dam that the manager here kept basically breaking the dam and throwing it up on the bank until they finally gave up. Okay, so that's the remnants of the beaver dam. And again, just to get back to that point, if the beavers were allowed to produce a dam here, it really would change the nature of this area. One, they eat, they cut trees, they cut shrubs. They really would do a number on the plant tree species that you see here. This area would very likely also have become flooded. And although these trees and shrubs are adapted to wetland conditions, they aren't necessarily adapted to being flooded all the time. So that can lead to a lot of plant, shrub, and tree death, and it will really change the landscape here. And this is a particularly sensitive landscape they're trying to maintain as it is. And so this preserve decided against allowing beavers to do their thing, even though they are indeed native species, they belong here. But this habitat is so sensitive and so rare, they'd rather keep it as it is than turn it into an area that's flooded via a beaver dam. All right, and so that's a decision any particular natural area needs to make when beavers move in. Here we have one of the probably currently larger trees, if not the largest tree in the preserve. This is a tulip tree. And there are a number of these in the vicinity here. Quite large. A DBH on that is probably about 4 feet, or 3.5 to 4 feet. And there's another right up here. Similar, but not quite as large a size. But there are a number of these around here, which you can see, that are impressive. This county has several preserves that are known for their large tulip trees. All right, so here's another. Okay, very ridged, furrowed bark. You can see the leftover seed capsules up there. There's another one in the distance. And there are some others in the vicinity here that had to be cut down. They fell or had to be cut down as well. So very large tulip trees are another feature of Cedar Bog when you visit. The area we're approaching now is part of the hardwood swamp forest, where there's quite a bit of standing water in the spring. It's a very important breeding site for frogs like spring peepers and other things, salamanders. It's filled with marsh marigolds in the spring and lots of other beautiful spring woodland flowers. But we can also really see the devastation caused by emerald ash borer in this particular location. So just glance around at this, and many of those trees you see down out there are ashes, green ashes and black ashes, along with some other species. There have also been some storms that have taken lots of trees down here as well. I see some tulip trees and other things in there as well. But a lot of that devastation was caused by emerald ash borer. And a lot of the young trees I'm seeing are ash trees indeed, with an unknown future, of course. But I see silver maples out there. Seems to be now pretty much the dominant species. There are elms here, American elms I'm seeing. Another tree that likes moist soils. And some other things, okay? So this is an area regenerating from the devastation of emerald ash borer. When you come in here in the spring as well, there's a lot of standing water in this area. So in the spring, it's a beautiful picture with these pools of water in the understory, with the trees maybe just starting to leaf out, marsh marigolds blooming, spring peepers in the background. It's a really beautiful sight, which we plan to see in a few months. So let's keep going. Well, that will conclude my winter tour of Cedar Bog. And I look forward to being back here in about 3 months or so for a spring visit, where I'll tell you more stories about Cedar Bog. There's so much to see here, so much natural history to share. I'll save some of it for my future episodes. So for today, I'm going to sign off. This is The Naturalist. Until next time, bye-bye.